As a technologist, I love tools, I love tech, I love toys, right? But at the same time, when we go into the organization, unless you're a pure tech organization, technology is an enabler. It's there to sort of serve a purpose for the business and support the business. Technology is easy, people are hard. That's how I sort of view it. And it's not to say people are hard, it's a matter of bringing people on that journey with you, having a perspective, and frankly, seeing what they see. Being in their shoes to a certain extent to get a better understanding goes a long way. Part of our responsibility as tech leaders is to educate our business leaders as well on the art of the possible, because we are never going to be the experts on some of the business processes. We will have a good understanding, but there's a balance between push and pull in that setup where the business leaders are asking for something, they have a general understanding. Well, what if we did this? You have a tech leader sort of providing that consulting and guidance to say, yep, it makes sense, or it doesn't make sense.
Welcome to the new automation mindset, where AI, automation, and integration come together. I'm your host, Markus Zirn, and as Chief Strategy Officer and part of the founding executive team at Workato, it is my mission to find these top innovators in AI, automation, and integration and share their journeys with all of you. So today, I'm really excited to have with me Rajeev Khanna. He's a long-term IT leader and has an incredible wealth of experience. So both CIO and CTO at Aon, VP Infrastructure Services at Expedia, Head of Global Infrastructure Production Service at Asurion, Executive Director, Global Head Central Service at UBS. My God, I mean, you've done it all. And, the reason we're doing this today is that Rajeev and I, we met at a dinner. We had a really nice dinner, had a good conversation, but then Rajeev started talking about, the IT challenges he's seen in his career. And I have to admit that kind of like how massive they were and so on, it just dazzled me. And I thought this would be really cool to just dig a little deeper, kind of learn from Rajeev, like, what big, massive IT challenges he has seen and, how he addressed them, how he conquered them. I think there's a lot of learning for all of us here on the call. So, Rajeev, I mean, first of all, thank you for joining. Welcome. Why don't you just give the audience a little bit of a flavor, a little bit of an appreciation of what kind of IT challenges you have seen? I mean, what I heard there was quite mind-boggling.
Markus, first of all, thank you for having me. It's looking forward to the conversation. I enjoyed the conversation over dinner. By the way, it was a wonderful dinner, so definitely enjoyed that. But more importantly, we enjoyed the conversation. So look, I mean, as you went through sort of my background and resume, one of the things that I would say is that I've had the privilege to work across some great brands, great organizations, and across multiple industries. So my career hasn't been limited to one particular segment. I've done banking and done the e-commerce and the Expedia and the services company with Aon now. And one of the things that I would say I've learned over my career is, even though there are different organizations, different industries, different type of client bases, but there's some of the challenges are quite common. So the companies that most organizations deal with the similar type of things. For example, you're dealing with lots of different tech. You're dealing with lots of different processes. You're dealing with lots of different systems and complexity in the environment. And it's hard to stitch things together and have those things work together. It creates scalability challenges. In addition to that, you end up in a conversation about efficiency and cost management, because now you accumulated so many different things in the environment. Now things feel and look expensive, and in some cases they are expensive. Trying to get a simple task done or to execute a simple process, it take a lot of effort and money and systems and things that ultimately translate it to a cost for the organization. And then there is organizational friction, right? Do we have the priorities aligned between tech and the business leaders? There are sometimes frictions within the tech organization because there's so many technologies and tools out there. Can we agree on what is the right solution for that right particular use case? And then the last thing I would add to that, I've had the opportunity to be part of the organizations where there's a lot of growth, both organic and inorganic. And when you think about inorganic growth, you end up accumulating lots of great assets, but on the downside, you end up with lots of assets. A lot of times those assets are competing. They are trying to, in a lot of cases, they're doing similar things, but they may be different systems and different tools. And from a business perspective, different processes. So you end up with a different set of processes that you're trying to execute on, and you can't align on a common process to do a same task because everybody's done it a certain different way over time. So that sort of goes back to where I started. It's complexity, lots of different tools, a lot of different products in the environment, and that's where I would say that kind of makes my job fun, but also challenging at the same time.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, I refer to, I think when you started talking there over dinner, it was like, okay, well, Markus and CEO, here's the challenge. We got like hundreds and hundreds of applications. We made big acquisitions. It's a company that has been around for a long time, so people have done things a certain way for a long time. And I was just thinking to myself, oh, if I were the IT leader there, I mean, that's I'm not sure what I would do in the morning. Would I really get out of bed? It seems it seems daunting. But as we talked about before, you've always done it at that high scale, right? I mean, it's different when you are like a tech company that it might grow quickly, but you're still at a very manageable scale. When you're at tens of thousands of people and billions of dollars of revenue and so on, it's a different game. My hats off for kind of staying calm in the moment and tackling the big monster. I mean, this is quite something. But tell me a little bit, like having gone through that in different industries, having gone through that, some of it more techy, some of it more established. Maybe if you give people in the audience here an appreciation, like, what's the easy stuff, in a way that maybe people think that, well, then nothing there's easy, but maybe some stuff is easier than you think. And maybe there's other things that you may even overlook, like the really hard stuff. Like how would you triage that out?
Yeah, look, I mean, so one of the things that I would say that I've learned over time in as I've had the opportunity to work across the organization is it's important to really spend the time up front to sort of listen, learn, and really trying to get an understanding. Look, I mean, as a technologist, I love tools, I love tech, I love toys, right? It's one of those things, but at the same time, when we go into the organization, unless you're a pure tech organization, technology is an enabler. It's there to sort of serve a purpose for the business and support the business. So to a certain extent, you can say nothing is easy, but everything is easy depending on the approach that you take, right? And you can break this down into bite-sized pieces and as to how you progress and build some momentum. And then once you have momentum, you can go faster. Some of the easy stuff I would say is technology is easy. In a lot of aspects, tech is easy. Picking a tool, picking a product, picking a solution is easy. That's, in scheme of things, that is a relatively easier thing to do because there are people, there's a good chance that somebody else has done it. There's a good chance that we have internal resources who know the ecosystem and they can help you find the right product. That's the easier part. You can buy the product, you can install the product, that's the easy part. But the harder part really comes down to adoption. It comes down to how are you going to use that tool? How it's going to be consumed? What are the right use cases and the business value that is going to deliver? Some of the other harder things that people or we forget. And I said I'm speaking from experience and mistakes rather than from having a playbook by any means, right? So this is all from learning and experience. Cultural change is hard. It's difficult to drive organizational change, and trying to focus on change management for an organization is difficult. And especially for large organizations with different diversity in terms of culture and geography, if perhaps that the part of the organization was acquired and they operated in a slightly different way. So that becomes a very difficult challenge. So one of the things that I've learned, especially over the last 4 or 5 years during the pandemic, has been around the importance of change management and getting people to see the value of what you're trying to drive and what does it mean for them. That's hard. It's really hard in a large organization. And look, I mean, and sort of along the same lines, it really comes down to pushing against the mindset of this is how we've always done it is difficult. And especially when you have situations where there are things and processes that are working, they're adding value, the company is growing, and you're doing things in a certain way, it's very difficult to make a case for change. Even though when you can see the change, hey, why disrupt something that's working? What if we get it wrong? What if we make a mistake? And if we make a mistake, we go backwards. And those things are difficult. So the way I sort of talk about it, technology is easy, people are hard. That's how I sort of view it. And it's not to say people are hard, it's a matter of bringing people on that journey with you and having a perspective and frankly seeing what they see and being in their shoes to a certain extent and to get a better understanding goes a long way.
It's interesting. So if you think about the modern IT leader, the modern CIO, right? So, it's I said IT leader. I mean, you would assume like it's technology is like the leader in the technology word, right? But then you said like, that's actually the easiest part of what I do. I probably agree. Now the funny thing is like you are probably the one person that in the company, maybe there's the president, also the CEO, but that's a different story. But all the other people are functional leaders, right? They know finance well, or they know marketing well, or they know sales well. I mean, you almost, or the CIO has to, if they want to be a really good modern CIO, they have to understand a little bit the processes in all these functions. It seems like challenging. It seems like it's, how do you, I'm just curious, how do you learn that? How do you get there? Because I frankly, I had some CIOs tell me that I met, they said, look, Markus, I think there is an opportunity there in marketing, but you need to help me because I don't really understand marketing. It's like I just have this, I smell like there's something we can do, but I don't really know how because I don't know marketing well enough. Like, how do you, it seems like a very tall order to really see eye to eye with the business on these business processes and do it for the whole company.
Yeah, look, I think the way I sort of think about that is, especially going forward, and it's been a trend that's been happening for some time, it's not new, right? Is technology leaders are not technology leaders, business leaders first who happen to do technology. It's a subtle but important mind shift to say, I'm here to serve the business. I need to understand what the business is. I bring in a certain level of expertise, no different than the CMO bringing the marketing expertise to the organization. I don't need to understand, they don't need to understand all things about technology, but it's useful for them to understand certain things about technology and as to how things get done. Similarly, for me as a technology leader, it's important for me to spend the time with the business leaders, trying to understand the processes, trying to understand what their priorities are, trying to understand what the objectives that they are driving, and having a common understanding on and alignment on those objectives goes a long way. Because then it becomes a partnership. Right? We are marching to the same objectives, we are marching to the same conversation, and that partnership goes a long ways. To a certain extent, look, I think a lot of people want to talk about what they do. So just asking the question of, hey, what do you spend your day? How do you do? What is important to you? And people are willing to share that. And look, that's back to sort of being able to do this in multiple industries. I've learned different things about different industries along the way. Because spending the time understanding upfront or along the way goes quite far when you're thinking about the tech solutions. Trying to pick a right solution and right product or right tool, etc. If you don't have an understanding, that is a hard thing to do, and it's a good chance that we're going to get it wrong. And once again, this is all coming from experience. There's a lot. We will talk about all the good stuff that I've done. We won't talk about all the mistakes that I've made, but I've learned from those mistakes, right? So these things sort of go a long way in terms of building that relationship, trying to get a better understanding. But equally important from me, my perspective, is educating our business partners on what the tech can do, because they also are interested, and they perhaps are making some assumptions on what they need and how they want to get it done, But if they have a better understanding, then perhaps they are not jumping to that conclusion and actually having a conversation to try to get to the right common answer.
Mm. Do you feel, I mean, look, we started Workado as a company because we wanted to remove some complexity that we saw with, good old traditional integration tools. We're almost like a lot of the time of the IT organization was actually on technology, right? It was so hard. I mean, I was at Oracle like 20 years back. I mean, it took quite a bit to make that technology work. I mean, just to stand it up, to deploy it, there was good old on-prem, and then you had like very complicated, like pre-SaaS, you had very complex applications, and it almost felt like maybe you would never get to spending time with the business because the technology was so hard. I mean, do you feel that the modern technologies are opening up time for you to kind of spend more on this process stuff? Is that actually working, like what we had in mind, or is it or is it harder than that?
Look, it's what we describe is ideal state to a certain extent, and that's what you aspire to be. But look, I mean, it is still hard, but at the same time, it is the investment upfront pays dividend in the long term. So I've seen that happen where I haven't spent the time. You end up actually taking longer, more expensive solutioning and perhaps making more mistakes versus taking a little bit of time up front and prioritizing that effort to try to spend time to learn the process, trying to have the conversation with the business leaders and creating that partnership. It goes a long way. But to that extent, look, I mean, I think the large organizations, we talk about sort of accumulation of assets. In some of the environments that I've been in, it's not hundreds, it's thousands of applications that are in the environment, right? So when you get into that, that's not an easy task to go after, and to that extent, it's a combination of, let's just call it the traditional way of stitching things together and having systems talk, but hopefully with the newer solutions like Workado and others coming in and actually making that a bit easier, because elimination of is going to take a very, very long time, and it would never happen because on every day we're creating new legacy, right? Because the new things that are getting created that the stuff that was good yesterday has now become legacy, right? So that fundamental problem isn't going to go away, but I'm hopeful we go from thousands of applications to hundreds of applications, but it still be hundreds, not single or two or three or 10. It still be hundreds that we have to deal with, and the core components of having them communicate with each other, having them share information, putting a business process on top of it where it's not visible to the business user, that's a critical component, and that's where the modern tooling has to help.
Mm-hmm. No, it makes sense. Makes total sense. Is there, I mean, you multiple times now said, like, look, we got a IT leader has to work with the business and has to focus on these processes and so on. Any kind of playbook how you orchestrate that interaction? That is there things that worked or maybe that didn't work, or because I mean, it's one thing of just going out and saying like, okay, so what do you need? Or what processes are you interested in? But maybe there's some learnings like how to actually even like do it most efficiently.
Yeah, look, I mean, some of the things that have worked is a simple as regular cadence and having a relationship with key folks across the organization, right? And that takes time and investment. So that's one aspect of it. The other part of that is, in cases, working with them together to start off small and creating some value they see value in what we have done. And that's sort of the momentum creation that I was mentioning before, is showing the value. And once they see the value and they see the partnership and they have confidence in what we're trying to get done, there's a more opportunity to actually get that seat at the table, and you're invited back in the second and the third time to be able to look at the next thing and the next thing, because there's a value proposition. And the flip of that is you don't do those things. You don't support what they need. You push on certain favorite tools and products and solutions that don't necessarily serve their purpose, and they feel like they haven't been heard. And now you're jamming down a solution that they really don't want. And then the conversation's over, then all the guards go up, and now it's much harder to sort of get back into that room to be able to have that conversation with the leaders, with their team members, etc. So it's more of the show the value, leverage the value, build on the momentum, and be open-minded, right? I mean, as I said, there are mistakes that get made, but you have a lot more sort of leeway when this is done in a joint collaborative fashion versus doing it on your own. And look, I mean, the days are gone where you go, hey, give me the requirements and I'll come back to you in 6 months and we will have a perfect answer. And that's never worked, right? I mean, that's how you end up with new modern development strategies and things, because that didn't work. Perhaps it served the purpose when the things weren't changing, they were somewhat static, and hey, you give me the requirements 6 months from now, those requirements are still valid. Usually nowadays, those 6 months later, those requirements have changed, and if you're not having a regular interaction and regular communication, you're going to deliver a wrong solution.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like the agile aspect, or kind of Gartner talks about the fusion team between IT and the business. I think the collaboration is probably key, and also inviting the business in almost to kind of maybe see a little more of where the meal is cooked and so on. But instead of just having like a clear demarcation line where, one just puts on the requirements and the other person ships, like, as you said, like 6 months later, the final solution. I mean, I've seen it, unfortunately, too many times in my past, that breaking that down and making that smaller steps, as you said, I think that's probably, and iterations is probably the key thing. So tell me about the change management. So change management is actually really interesting, because that's another angle to it. Like, how do you really get it to adopt it? So not only does the IT leader have to be like knowing all the business processes across all functions, but you also have to almost be like some kind of a chief psychologist in kind of like reading people and, which ones are willing to adopt and which are not, and so on. I mean, does it feel like this sometimes? I mean, does it feel like you have to, in addition to technology, have that kind of human bond, almost like a psychology kind of component to kind of make them bought in? Or, is that what you're thinking? Or how do you think about this, the change management?
Two things you said. One, I just want to clarify one, right? First of all, I don't expect myself or anybody on my team to be expert at marketing and finance and HR and businesses and such, right? We want to have a good enough understanding where we can stitch the things together. And one of the things that you mentioned earlier, I have a privilege in my role to be able to see across the entire organization, across different functions, both sort of the finance, HR, legal, etc., but also across the business functions, and have there are not that many roles in the organization where people get to see it all. Right? So we have a privileged position to be able to help connect those dots, but that doesn't mean that we become the experts. I would never be an expert in the things that the company does, and there are people who do this for a living. And then sort of tying back to the earlier comment of having perhaps two in the box, and a technologist and a business person driving the change, because you need the business expertise. You need that voice around the table when you're sort of delivering or designing something, right? Because without that, we're going to end up with the wrong solution. Now, sort of coming back to your change management answer, look, I mean, I never would admit or want to be a psychologist, because I think that's a tough job. The key factor is, one of the things that we've started to do, or a few of the things that we started to do over the last number of years, is thinking about what does it mean for the user? How is they going to perceive that? Would they view this as here's yet another thing that technology is jamming down to me, versus I get value out of it? And obviously sort of changing the pivot of what is it in for you as a user goes a long way. And if you can tell, part of this is a lot of us are not good storytellers. And bit of that storytelling is an art, and you have to figure out how to do that in an effective way. So we've sort of gotten better at it. We've got some outside help to do that. In addition to that, we've actually have sort of mobilized a certain set of people who don't sit in technology to be our voice in the local offices, in the regions, in the countries, to be our champions. So we give them early visibility of what's coming down in 3 months from now, what's coming down from 6 months from now, etc. Get their input of what works, what doesn't work. In a lot of cases, they become our pilot users. They get to sort of get it. They get to. These are people who have passion for both technology and business. So they actually want to get the new tools faster, and they want to be able to play around with these things. But in return, they have to give us feedback. And we take that feedback before we go out to our 50,000, 60,000 users at scale. But we use the 150 or so people that are our champions to be able to drive these things. So look, I mean, I would be lying if I said, hey, we figured this out. We haven't. It is a bit of a work in progress, but we become more focused and very mindful on how we think about these things in terms of the impact to the user, the time of the day, how do we make it easy, how do we make this least burdensome from them, and being able to tell the story of, here's the education on this new capability that we are giving you that will make your job easier. And that has a bit slightly different sort of flavor to it versus, here's a tool, you must use it.
Yeah. It's actually really interesting. So funny story. Well, maybe not so funny, but in my early days, first job out of college, I did business process reengineering. And we actually came to a client. And so the funny thing is the client was basically said like, look, we've done it all. So we're being the consultants. And here are the processes. And they popped on the table this 300-page document with all the processes documented and going like, okay, well, I don't know why we need you, but it's all done. Unfortunately, nothing ever got adopted. And so you kind of looked through this book and, you know, everything was the right processes. It was all done correctly. But I think it wasn't bought in from the people. And so what we did is we almost like took that book to the side. We created a group. So we invited in 30 people from different parts of the organization to form a steering group. And then we basically built these processes again, just this time with the people actually being part of the process. And it actually worked. It dissipated into the organization. So I think that beta customer kind of approach or making them part of it, I think that's definitely, I mean, I've totally seen that work. It's very interesting.
Yeah, now I would imagine what you deployed with the smaller group, was documented in those 300 pages is probably about the same, but now you have a buy-in and they have a piece of the sort of the incentive invested in trust because they were part of the building process and the design process rather than somebody just telling them what to do. And there's a good chance, or I would guess, right? There's a chance that what's in the document isn't exactly how actually the work gets done.
No, totally. I mean, the interesting thing is that again, just to reiterate, what was in this book actually wasn't wrong. I think someone did a good job intellectually analyzing it, and I think it was. I don't think the delta was that big compared to what the group worked out together. I think it was really all in the process of how it was discovered, then like what it really was all about. For the adoption, the journey really mattered, how you got there, because you had these champions then, and the champions would go. They were respected when they went back into their organizations, and so on. And you had almost like a cultural feeler into these different places where, you know, they've done it a certain way, but then having these champions be part of the, you know, basically all the hard work in the beginning to wrestle down to that process that everyone would agree on, actually then worked out. It helped you later on because people with respect would explain it to their colleagues in the field. It was so. I'm actually curious in terms of organization. Is there anything that you've done or any learnings you had, like any roles of people that maybe you hired in organizations that typically are not there? Like if you don't have that kind of a role, then you're probably in trouble. Is there anything like that?
Yeah, like one of them, when we talk about the change management, one of the sort of the roles that we created, once again, a combination of hiring from the outside, and it's a very small group of folks that are our organizational change champions sitting in tech. We don't outsource that to other functions in the organization because we are, once again, just for internal consumption, we have very large population. Just to have that large population get the full value out of what we are investing in and the tools that we're deploying and such, it's worth having a small group of people who are genuinely thinking about organization change management, deployment strategies, communications, etc. It has been hugely beneficial. And as I mentioned, we did more of this in the last 3, 4, 5 years than we've done in the past. Right. And frankly, over during the pandemic, when everybody was working at home, you didn't have the offices, you couldn't walk down the hall and have the conversation, etc. That became extremely critical because now there are people sitting everywhere in the world at their homes, etc. How do you do a proper communication? How do you make sure that they have a good understanding of what's happening to their machine, or what new tool has been deployed, or what new capabilities that are coming? And then similarly, a mechanism for them to be able to provide feedback. So that role, I would say that you don't need a large group. It's a very small group of folks that are just thinking through this, and they are embedding themselves into any large scale deployment to ensure that these certain key steps happen. And then, as I said, these champions are not new roles. These folks that we talk about, they have a day job. They happen to enjoy what the technology aspects of thing, and they're to a certain extent they're volunteering their time to us to help us with these types of activities, and they spend the time to do it, right? And it's not in a formal role. I can't write a job description for it, and we didn't go out and hire people. We just asked around, and we got a bunch of volunteers and said, "Hey, fantastic! Let's how do we bring you into this loop?" And as you said, these folks are sitting in local geographies. They are respected by their peers. And when they get a certain messaging coming from them versus coming from some random IT mailbox, it goes a long way, and it gets a different sort of a readership than what we could do from a central function.
And my feeling is that those, I mean, getting a little bit into the book, right? The new automation mindset. I think we talked a lot about, I guess, what's in the book about the scale mindset, that fusion with the business, but also, process mindset. But and then what I wanted to highlight is the growth mindset, because my sense is that if you have that champion from the business that you brought into IT, my sense is not only will they help with adoption and bringing in the users, but they probably will also have really good growth elements, meaning they probably have really good suggestions for improving the process, is my sense, right?
100%, because once again, they're the ones who are living this day in, day out, and they bring ideas and suggestions, say, oh, well, what about this? What about that? And that sort of helps with prioritization conversation of what we want to work on. And obviously, if you have a distributed, diverse group of people giving you a feedback, usually you can get themes out of that feedback that helps you decide where to make the next investment or the next bit of work that needs to go in to drive those capabilities or efficiencies for the organization.
Almost feels a little, I used to do product management for quite some time. It almost feels like a little bit of a product manager role for these business processes or so, like someone who, they wouldn't be able to code it, right? That's an engineer's job, but they understand it, they analyze it, they probably make sense of it and so on, and then help also to roll it out.
There's a role of a process manager, right? Or a process owner. You need to have a process owners who feel accountability for the process. They are, and it's not just a matter of defining the process, it's about the changing of the process, defining the efficiency, driving the adoption of that process, etc. So yes, it's a combination, perhaps going back to the two in the box type concept. It's a process owner with the product or tech owner delivering the outcome that is desired by the business.
Yeah. It's almost equivalent to the pairs in agile development. It's totally makes sense. Listen, so we talked a lot about kind of these big challenges. They're being less on the tech side, more on the adoption side, more on the understanding the business kind of side. Now, we do have new technologies coming at us, though, all the time. Probably the most important one, like now, is generative AI, right? The AI angle. Like, what do you think? I mean, do you have any ideas, any early observations how that's gonna affect all the things that we talked about? Because it feels like this might be a little bit more substantial than what we've seen in the past, almost.
Yeah, look, I mean, it's a very exciting technology. I think there's that the buzz that's out there is real, and it's not. I think there's quite a bit of excitement, and clearly it's going to be disruptive to many different organizations along the way, in a good way. And obviously, you have to figure out how does this interact with people. How do you do this in a safe way, right? Because there's clearly a concern around safety, accuracy, data protections, and those types of things that you have to do this. And as an IT leader, I want to be an early adopter, or maybe a better way of saying is I want to be an early experimenter, so that we can deploy this in a secure manner and in a safe way, so that it's being used for the right use cases. AI and machine learning is not new, right? We have been using those techniques and capabilities for many years. Obviously, generative AI is the new aspect on top of all of those things. And to that extent, one of the things that we have to be careful with is finding the right use case for the generative AI versus the right tool. For in some use cases can be addressed with the traditional AI or the traditional machine learning models and such. There are things that are perhaps don't even need AI, and there's different way of doing things. But finding the right use case and getting that value proposition demonstrated is critical. And within the organizations that I'm part of, we've done some early adoption. We've done the things that we're doing. The other exciting part of this is, look, it's become more consumer, right? Access, whereas some of the other, let's just call it the traditional AI, was more computer scientists and the technologists and things that are thinking about it, but it's become consumer grade, and I don't think adoption is going to be an issue. Adoption may be less of an issue. Perhaps it's the opposite side of it, is to say, hey, slow down, we need to be careful as to how we do this and how we deploy this in a careful fashion. So I don't think adoption is going to be the issue. And the other exciting part is that not just internally, but our providers and the tools that we use and the companies that we do business with and the products that we buy, those providers are starting to integrate these capabilities into their solutions that will actually help us go faster without having to figure all of this stuff out, right? It's just that it's very difficult to do this in a large, complex organization, or it's just challenging. And there are too many opportunities, so it's hard to sort of figure out where do you prioritize. Right, so having this embedded into some of the capabilities is going to be critical.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. I mean, it's also interesting to see like how your mind works, Rajeev, which is kind of, I think you already, you gave us the overview and said, like, adoption is really important, and then kind of understanding the business is really important. Technology is maybe less of the problem. And then I think you were going through the checklist. It's like, okay, well, I think adoption, not really a problem. I mean, because I think you're totally right. I think there is a kind of consumerization of AI. I think the adoption, GenAI is so much easier to adopt than the old ML AI kind of thing, because that needed like scientists. I would also agree with you that the use cases itself, I think you were exercising your business kind of mindset, which is, I think a lot of the discussion around Gen AI has been on the technology so far. What bigger, better LLM, or like, what does Google do? What does AWS do? What does OpenAI do? And so on. Whereas the the conversations around the best use cases, I think we're in the very early innings. I don't think I mean, you're hoping that the vendors are going to help solve that for you, but my feeling is that just in the whole community, IT community, that understanding, I think if anyone can help the organization figure out the best use cases, it's probably going to be IT and the CIO, right? I mean, I think it's almost like a little bit of a responsibility, but it's early innings. I don't think we had too much of that discussion.
No, I don't. Look, I mean, you're 100% right. I think that this is there's a lot of excitement. There's a lot of pull. Frankly, it's one of those technologies where there's a lot of pull from the user side, but it's not necessarily always the right use case. And perhaps sort of tying back to what we talked about earlier in terms of this, the tech leaders having a good understanding of the business processes, having a good understanding of what the business objectives are, and then being able to apply the right tool, and GenAI being a very powerful potential tool that comes up and now is in the toolkit that we can sort of apply to the right use case. And look, I mean, I think part of our responsibility as tech leaders is to educate our business leaders as well on the art of the possible, because once again, we are never going to be the experts on some of the business processes. We will have a good understanding, but if they understand a bit more about the art of the possible and what the technology can do for them, again, in partnership, you can come back with a appropriate use case, because there's a balance between push and pull in that setup, where the business leaders are asking for something. They have a general understanding of what if we did this. You have a tech leader sort of providing that consulting and guidance to say, yep, it makes sense, or it doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's super interesting. I mean, I have to say at Workato, it's very exciting times. I mean, we just announced what we call the agentic framework, which where we kind of instead of just pushing like LLMs into the Workato flows, or doing co-pilots for that matter in the builder experience, we said like, hey, how can we fundamentally use this to improve on these processes that are so hard often to do? And we said like, okay, well, instead of describing step by step what the business process should look like, maybe if we describe like digital twins of these employees that are in the process, the actors in the process, and we they have this an LLM. It's we have a RAG architecture underneath that where you can feed them with knowledge and expertise, and then you have these the new LLMs are more action oriented with functions. You can give them skills of what to do, and then you can actually let them loose and let them interact. These people, you can actually solve business processes by describing the multiple actors involved. Now, again, it's very early days. I mean, but we're kind of excited about what that. I don't know what your take is on that. Like, you feel that could be useful?
Yeah, look, I mean, that's exciting, and as I said before, right? I'm hoping the Workatos of the world and other folks that we do work with, or they provide us tools and capabilities, that they are doing some of the thinking. Because look, I mean, you have a broader visibility of what your customers want than I would as a single user, and I want to learn from that, right? I want to learn from what you are seeing and what others are doing, because we may not have thought about everything, and we want to see more of that and coming to us. And this is perhaps a push and pull between a supplier and a consumer like us, and Workato and Aon or other companies, to be able to sort of have that conversation, because you have visibility that we perhaps don't, or you've thought about things that we haven't, or equally, we can give you sort of use cases and scenarios that you may not have thought
about. Yeah. Well, it's exciting. It's I think we recognize it's very early days. I do feel that there was an initial hype of what all of this can do, and I'm sure it's going to go through its curves, but long term, my personal sense is that we might still be underestimating long term what this could do for us. It's exciting. Hey, Rajeev, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for spending the time here with us, also sharing with the audience, like what you've learned. I think there's a lot of important knowledge nuggets in there that I think are really important for anyone who wants to be a modern IT leader. So thank you for that. And great. I mean, it's wonderful. We had that dinner together and we could take this to the next level. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. It's a great conversation, and I appreciate being able to share some of the thoughts, and thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. Please make sure to rate today's episode, leave us a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to the show so you will never miss an episode. I'll see you next time.